Okay, so I was talking about if you live above 35 degrees north, it's a good idea to supplement vitamin D, and I'll talk about why in this video. So this is just using Google Earth. There's nothing revolutionary as such. The Earth is not flat; it is an oblique sphere, as you can see. And you recognise these countries on here, so North America, United States, Canada, Mexico, for example, Europe, Middle East, Africa, etc., blah, blah, blah. Right, so let's just start to give us a little bit of perspective. So I will turn on some lines of latitude and longitude. So latitude is essentially these lines that go across the middle. So at 0 degrees latitude, you have the equator. So this runs here. So the sun around the equator is pretty much overhead all year round. I mean, it's not strictly the case because the Earth's actually a bit like that. But we'll ignore that for now and we'll assume that the Earth's all out. So if you lived on the equator, you're going to get sun all year round, right? And we get vitamin D predominantly through sunlight. About 90% of the vitamin D that we get is through sunlight. About 10% is through diet, but the thing is, our diet has changed so much now that we don't really consume the foods which contain vitamin D, which tend to be sort of organ meats and some of the oily fish, but now they're sort of farmed in a way that it really is the drawbacks and the negatives really outweigh the benefits, so it really doesn't work. But the best way by far is through sunlight. But here's the problem. A lot of people live above 35 degrees north. And if you live above 35 degrees north, which I'll show you in a minute, and I'm going to talk about the northern hemisphere at the moment, so it's everybody north of this, and this will be the southern hemisphere, is because at the moment it's winter. In the southern hemisphere, it's reversed. But why this is a problem is if you live above this, when the sunlight comes in, and one of the wavelengths of sunlight is called UVB, which you've probably heard of, ultraviolet B. It's just a wavelength. But above that, at certain times of year, really from perhaps March through to the end of October, the sun does not get high enough in the sky. So what happens is that the UVB is actually reflected, or refracted is the correct term, refracted back into the atmosphere. So we actually don't get what we need. And vitamin D is super important. And we used to think that, well, not what you used to think, but it's sort of common myth is that vitamin D is just a vitamin. It's not. Vitamin means vital, amine. And vitamin D, yes, it's vital, but it's not an amine at all. It's actually a precursor to a bunch of different hormones. We absorb it through the skin, and it's super useful. It's got the ability to do all sorts of things and get inside the nucleus of our cells, and it can help prevent respiratory problems and all sorts of other problems as well. And that's why you find that during the winter months, that people have more colds and coughs and flu and other illnesses, so pretty much all causes. And so it's a real problem. People don't supplement, and they need to supplement. This is for many reasons. One, because of the latitude that we live at, which I'll show you in a sec, but also because we don't spend much time outside in the sun. We go out in our cars, and our cars have got UV filtered glass and things like this. Whereas you go back, millennia, we spent a lot of time outside, and we all lived much closer to the equator. But now we've started to live a bit further north. So if you look at this, let's say sort of 35 degrees north. So if you look at these lines here, you've got between 30 and 40. It's just there. Now, if you look at that, Los Angeles, probably across to, I suppose that might be Savannah, Georgia, I'd probably say, somewhere like that. Savannah, South Carolina, yeah, somewhere like that. They're really, anything north of that, you're not going to be getting the vitamin D that you need. And even south of that, a lot of people spend a huge amount of time inside because the United States is a very developed country. So you've got huge part North America, huge population, probably a couple 100 million people at least, north of that, all of Canada. And then if you come across to Europe, you look at this. So really only southern Spain and parts of Greece and Turkey, but everything else, much of Spain, much of Italy, all of France, Germany, Poland, Netherlands, all of the United Kingdom, Ireland, or Scandinavia, all well above that. So this is where we struggle. Now, people with darker skin, yes, they will find it more difficult to absorb vitamin D. So I'll give an example of that. If you take a country like India, for example, probably lies latitude, I suppose, between maybe 7 degrees north and maybe 30 degrees north. Now, they're darker skin than people who are indigenous to Europe, and we're at between sort of 50 and 60 degrees north. So if you put somebody with darker skin and you move them to a more northerly latitude, they struggle to absorb vitamin D. And this is one of the reasons why COVID, for example, actually causes a problem, because they have lower vitamin D levels. Now, this has been known for so long that vitamin D is crucially important when it comes to respiratory infections and many other infections. But it's only now that it's really starting to come out, and it needs to be talked about. It's super important. Whereas if you were to go to sort of sub-Saharan Africa or the Caribbean, you don't really see, central parts of Central America, you don't see vitamin D deficiency. People are outside. It's not a problem. But we need to be aware of this, because the studies that are showing now, I think if you remove age as a factor, about 80 to 90%, please don't quote me on this, but I think it's about 80 to 90% of people who end up hospitalized with COVID and don't make it out have low or deficient vitamin D. So vitamin D can not only prevent you from getting COVID, as in reduce the chances of you getting it. It's not going to stop that. Only vaccination can ultimately get that close. But not only will it prevent your chance of getting it, it also will limit the severity of it, which is super important. So, when you look at this, how many people live above the 35th parallels because they're parallel lines, you've got a good few billion people. You've got much of North America, Canada, much of Europe. You've got pretty much all of Russia, really. You've got a lot of China as well. If you look at this, you've probably got, Shanghai is probably about 30 degrees, I think, something like that. This is and pretty much all of Japan as well. This is really, really important. So you need to be supplementing. I don't talk about Southern Hemisphere too much, one, because they're in summer at the moment, but also not so many people live there. It's pretty much, it's oceanic. You've just got Australia, New Zealand. New Zealand vitamin D deficiency is a problem as well. And then really you've got southern parts of Argentina and not really much else. Again, so it's low population, but the huge amounts of population are not there. So you need to be supplementing. My advice would be, get your bloods done so you know your numbers. And you can do that using one of the, whichever country you're in. You can do that with a sort of, kit that will come in the post, and you can do a finger prick one, send it back to a lab, get the results. But I would recommend you do that in the new year, just because of things like Christmas post and the mail gets slow and so on. But you really need to be supplementing an absolute minimum of 1,000 international units per day. You really do. And then when you know your numbers, then you can increase or decrease accordingly. But it's super important, and it's not talked about. But it can literally save your life. That's the reality of it. There is a 326-page document presented by the, I can't remember actually who wrote it. I think it was the Scientific Advisory Commission for Nutrition. I can't remember, something like that, in the UK. It's sent to every GP, but who's read it? It was done in 2016 as a review. But it's just not looked at. So it's really important, really, really important, this stuff. So hopefully that helps and gives you a bit of an explanation of what 35 degrees north actually means. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that. If you want to find out what latitude you live at, just type into Google what latitude is, and then whatever the name of your town or city, and you go from there. Anyway, I hope that's helpful.